Hello, my name is Joe Groch, and I am the Director of Golf at the Glades Golf and Country Club in Naples, Florida. And I'm also an adjunct professor at Florida Gulf Coast University in the Professional Golf Management Program. Now, before we begin, how many people here play golf? Right? And how many people here know that the golf industry is in decline? Well, I'm here today to share with you some research I conducted in the golf industry related to measuring effective golf facilities. And the reason I conducted this research is because the golf industry is not only in decline, but it's also in a little bit of a crisis. As you can see from this graph, the golf industry has been in decline for almost a decade. In fact, the total number of golfers has decreased from 30 million in 2005 to about 25.7 million in 2011. Now, this represents a 17% decline in the number of golfers over this period. Now, for a sleeve of golf balls, what is the 5-year retention rate for men and women golfers in the golf industry? In other words, if someone had taken up the game 5 years ago, what is the percentage of people that are still playing the game today? Okay, now what do you think that might be for men? And what might you think it be for women? Okay, for men it's 54%. And for women, it's only 33%. In other words, only 33% of women that took up the game 5 years ago are still playing the game today. Now, in addition to that, the turnover rate for golf managers is 19%, and that's according to the National Golf Foundation, and that's 46% higher than the national average. Now, since 68% of golf facilities are nonprofit, the traditional income statement and balance sheet measures become extremely limited because there's no one profit motive for most clubs. They have other motives for being in existence, such as the benefit of their members or patrons. Also, there are no other industry standard measures beyond the balance sheet and financial statements in the golf industry for organizational efficiency. There are some revenues per round and cost per round information, but they're really not comparable between various facilities. So the question becomes, how do you measure success and compare golf facilities? The purpose of this study is to posit a method for measuring effective golf facilities from a multidimensional point of view in order to allow managers, board of directors, auditors, and other stakeholders to compare and improve organizational outcomes. Now, since profit is not the primary force driving most golf facilities, the question becomes, what would be an appropriate measure for these facilities? Well, utilizing current research in the area of multidimensional measures such as 3BL or triple bottom line, which we'll discuss shortly, a 5-pillar approach was developed. Now, these 5 pillars or measures include financial measures, which includes a number of financial ratios including liquidity, solvency, and operating efficiencies, which are basic broad measures of financial health that any bank or financial investor might look at. Customer satisfaction, which is based on golfer satisfaction surveys, are used to provide an index of golfer satisfaction. Also, employee satisfaction would be another pillar, which is also predicated on surveys. Charitable contributions, or as I like to call it, a philanthropic index, which is the amount of resources a facility donates to the community, including things like the use of the facility, volunteer hours, donated rounds of golf, and money donated. And then finally, the environmental pillar, which is based on a modified rubric from the Audubon International people. and includes water conservation, chemical usage, wildlife management, and an array of other measures to determine environmental performance. Now, the problem with using these 5 distinct pillars is to arrive at a single efficiency number that has a common denominator. The problem is that all of these indexes or ratios are not really comparable. For example, you cannot compare the financial ratios to chemical usage or to customer satisfaction for that matter. So within each pillar, each facility was given a percentile rank based on their performance within that pillar. This percentile rank then becomes the common denominator used to compare organizational effectiveness between facilities. It's kind of like an SAT score and how your percentile ranking is relative to other students, as an example. And this, of course, provides us with the overall organizational performance when we sum the multidimensional indices into one number. So why take a multidimensional approach, and what does the research say about this? Well, the need for the multidimensional approach to defining and assessing organizational effectiveness has really been around for more than 40 years. In fact, in 1967, Yuckman and Seashore developed multidimensional approaches to measuring organization effectiveness due to the fact that they believe that since corporations and entities are of varying nature, one single measure was not really good enough, i.e. the financial measure, to measure effectiveness. So they posited a number of multidimensional measures all the way back in 1967. Then, of course, in 1994, Elkington posited the famous triple bottom line, or 3BL, which includes financial, social, and environmental factors, and developed a whole discussion around the role of corporate social responsibility when measuring corporate effectiveness. And then finally, in 2011, you had people like Slapper and Hall developing their indexes of multidimensional measures and positing essentially that in order to really get and capture an organizational effectiveness number, you need to really look at a number of different items, because organizations not only vary between industries but even within industries. So the question becomes, what are the benefits to multidimensional measures, and what does the research tell us? Well, according to Ittner and Larkin in 2000 from the Wharton School of Business, non-financial measures tend to provide closer links to long-term organizational strategies. For example, if a company is trying to improve its corporate image, you can't see that in financial measures. Also, the traditional balance sheet and income statement measures are not effective because the drivers of success in many industries are non-tangible assets, such as things like intellectual property or even customer satisfaction. Again, you can't see those on the traditional balance sheet and income statement. Non-financial measures can be better indicators of future financial performance. If a company has invested heavily in a lot of energy saving and environmental practices, the benefit and future financial performance cannot be seen in the basic financial statements, but could be seen in some of the environmental practices that they have. And finding a way to measure those can provide a future forecast of financial performance. Non-financial measures are less susceptible to external noise than accounting measures. If anybody has dealt with a prior period adjustment, they know what we're talking about here. In other words, financial measures can be bounced around for all kinds of technical changes, whereas things like customer satisfaction or employee satisfaction aren't readily changed unless the company, of course, has some kind of crisis. But in addition to the academic thinking on multidimensional measures. A number of public accounting firms are also employing the use of broader metrics in determining company financial position and organizational sustainability, including KPMG, Pete Marwick, Deloitte Touche, Ernst & Young, and Citi. So taking the concept of the 5 pillars of organizational effectiveness, research was conducted among 10 facilities in Southwest Florida, including 27 managers that participated in interviews, 121 employees that participated in the employee satisfaction surveys, 237 golfers that participated in the golfer satisfaction survey, and then data was accumulated and analyzed in IBM's M.P.S version 21 statistical package for descriptive statistics, inferential statistics, and multiple analysis. Now, using the 5 pillars as a basis for percentile ranking, the following graph was generated to indicate the relative effectiveness of various facilities. Now, the practical use of this instrument is that it allows other organizations to use the same instruments to measure themselves in order to determine how, where, and why their clubs are effective or ineffective. And they can see on this scale where they might fall. In addition to that, they can break it down even further into understanding where they are superior or inferior in terms of financial performance or customer satisfaction or employee satisfaction or environment or their philanthropic measures. Using stepwise multiple regressions and inter-item correlations, a number of fascinating results occurred and were observed. First, in terms of organizational effectiveness, the greatest determinant of organizational effectiveness was, interestingly enough, golfer satisfaction with a beta of 1.034. And the greatest influence or determinant of golfer satisfaction was perceived value with an R-square of 0.675 and a p-value of 0.1. After this came employee satisfaction, had the greatest influence on overall organizational effectiveness. And the job interest was the item that influenced employee satisfaction the most, as you can see with an R-squared of 0.728. Next, the environmental pillar affected organizational effectiveness with a beta of 1.008, and the item that most influenced the environmental pillar was water conservation. Next, the philanthropic index with a beta of 0.981, and the item that influenced that most was the service hours that the organization allowed their employees to donate to the general community. And then finally, the financial pillar was the last item, and the category that influenced that the most was financial efficiency, which is revenues over assets with an R-squared of 0.875. Now, at this point, some of you might say, whoa, you know, what do you mean the financial pillar doesn't really influence organizational effectiveness? I think financial is the most influential. Well, if you really think about it, since most organizations in the golf industry are nonprofit, they all pretty much are going to be around zero, plus or minus a little bit. So you don't see wide swings in their financial performance. You know, some organizations were more financially healthy than others, but in terms of actually moving the overall organizational effectiveness number, the fact that they're all operating towards zero profit makes that one of the least influential variables in total organizational effectiveness. Now, here's the big point and the idea that we're really trying to communicate here. Golf facilities are organisms that encompass things like land, water, plants, animals, human beings, capital, buildings, and equipment. To ignore this fact is to deny its essential reality. Now, Albert Einstein stated that a person experiences life as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. Our task must be to free ourselves from this self-imposed prison to find the reality of oneness. The point is that golf facilities are more than just the sum of their parts and their financial performance, and that it requires a multidimensional approach to provide a more accurate picture of the club's performance. In fact, it was interesting to note that 80% of effective organizations surveyed were among the top performers in at least 4 of the 5 pillars, whereas only 20% of the facilities were among the top performers in one category. In other words, when a club or its management team performed well, it performed well in multiple categories. Or maybe another way of saying it, good management is universal. Finally, the implications of these findings can be significant in a number of areas, including it can be significant to auditors searching for indicators of fraud. For example, the Financial Performance Index was highly correlated with overall organizational effectiveness to the point of the R-square being a robust 0.838 with a p-value of 0.002. So in other words, there's a great correlation between overall organizational effectiveness and financial performance. So if you have a company that doesn't have a high organizational effectiveness index, the odds are they're not going to have a high financial performance either. And this could show up to auditors and point the way to some possible problems. It can also be beneficial for managers looking for trends in competitive position. You can see if your organizational effectiveness index is getting better or worse over time and where it relates relative to other organizations. You can also use the Organizational Effectiveness Index for strategic planning. In other words, you can find those areas that you need to develop in a more positive way and put strategic plans around, for example, your Employee Satisfaction Index. And finally, it can be very effective for board of directors trying to assess the competency of management teams. In other words, how do you look at one management team versus another, or one club versus another, and determine whether in fact that management team is optimizing the resources and the experiences of its members? Well, by looking at your Organizational Effectiveness Index, you can see overall whether you're in the top 50 percentile or in the bottom 50 percentile. So finally, in conclusion, what we posit here is a method of finding a way to look at how can you measure overall organizational effectiveness that encompasses more than just the financial performance. And it's believed by taking this approach that true positive knowledge can be effective and true plans can be put into place in a holistic way for the benefit of not only the organization but the at large. Thank you all for listening and have a happy new year.